All right, so this morning's discussion will be about Paul Tillich and the relationship between existentialism and radical theology. So let's talk about that phrase first of all, radical theology. Hey, I thought this was a philosophy class. Why are you sneaking this in at the end? Why are we talking about theology? Well, you remember, especially in the discussions from the beginning of the semester, and also when you listen to the video on Sartre, you know that there are two kinds of existentialists. There are atheistic existentialists, and that includes Sartre and Beauvoir and Heidegger. But there were also a category of existentialists. Again, that term is kind of loose, but that include religious thinkers. And Paul Tillich is one of them. There were others. Gabriel Marcel, in a way, gets lumped in with them. He's a French Catholic thinker. Martin Buber, a Jewish thinker, gets sort of lumped in with the existentialists. So I didn't want this semester to end without talking about this other flavor of existentialism and how that might operate. Sartre, as you remember, said that people can call themselves religious existentialists, but in the end, the basic assumptions of existentialism are atheistic, and they would describe religious belief as a free choice made without any foundations or any ground underneath of it. In the absurdity of life, you may make that choice, but you don't start with God. You don't start with religion. Well, maybe Sartre's right, maybe he's not right, until it gives us a way of thinking about it. So what is radical theology? Well, the word radical, you might think of, crazy protesters or whatever. The word radical comes from the same word where we get our vegetable radishes, all right? And it refers to the roots. So it's a theology that digs all the way down to the roots of religious experience and religious expressions, down to the roots. That's what it's about. It differs conceptually from what we could call confessional theology, and that's probably the theology we're most familiar with. Confessional theology is the thinking, the logos, the words, the thought, the reasoning about theos, about God, from a particular religious, historical, concrete religious point of view. So Roman Catholic or Orthodox or Presbyterian or whatever, there's like thousands of denominations, literally, in the United States alone, who consider themselves Christians. So confessional theology would be the point of view of what God is all about, what our relationship with God is all about, and who we are as human beings, as creatures of God, and what our destiny might be from that concrete particular point of view. It is the thinking and the self-understanding of each of these particular communities of people. So they're not universalistic. Even though from the point of view of any one of those communities, what they're saying, I think they think would apply to everybody. But what they say is not accepted by everybody, because the evidence for that is that there are all these 10,000 other different points of view about what Jesus was all about and who God is and so forth. It's historical. They develop over time. They have a local quality, a parochial kind of quality, because it's a certain concrete community of persons over periods of time, maybe long periods of time, working out their thoughts about what it means to be, in this case, a Christian. And what confessional theology purports to do, in these times are no different, maybe especially in these times, try to bring this traditional theological, but parochial in each case, set of ideas to bear on our present situation. So another way to put it is preachers, pastors are out there, every week, online now, I would hope, giving sermons, trying to say what these traditional views of God and Jesus and us, what these traditional views say to us in the situations in which we find ourselves. The question that radical theologians ask is that project really being successful? Like, we have questions. We especially now, we got big questions about who we are and what matters and what's the meaning of life and how do we understand ourselves and what's it all about? Where are we going? We got big questions. are the answers that are being given by the confessional communities, are they answering the questions we actually have? Or are they answering questions that no one actually has anymore? That's kind of that's the issue here. Are they giving answers to questions that people don't or are not actually asking at the current time? And if you wonder what the answer to that question might be, you can go back and consider this phenomenon that we've brought up a couple times during the semester of the rise of the nones, the N-O-N-E-S. Why is it that people, particularly younger persons, are not identifying with confessional communities the way their parents and certainly their grandparents, great-grandparents did? Why aren't they? And part of the answer, maybe central to the answer, is those confessional communities aren't giving me the answers to the questions that I actually have. So what's radical theology? Well, in some ways, it underlies, it's more basic, it's at the roots of all confessional theologies, and the way it operates, the way it works, it's you could say it's parasitic upon confessional theology. So you can't think of radical theology as one more alternative theology. That's not really the best way to think about it. It's not really an alternative to Roman Catholic or Presbyterian or Methodist or whatever. It's not an alternative about that to those. In a way, it's trying to get under the hood of everything that goes on and why the things that go on in these various confessional communities, why they go on. And if it weren't for confessional theologies, radical theology wouldn't have anything to do. It wouldn't have anything to talk about. It has to do its work in the light of the various confessional theologies, but trying to get at the roots of that. Confessional theology provides the subject matter and the opportunity for radical theology to come in and try to show us all what's going on, and perhaps why what's going on is not as satisfying to us as we might think it should be. But it is still not tied to any specific confession, or even, I'm focusing on Christianity, but not even any particular concrete religion. It's why is there religion? What's going on? Where's that coming from, such that it's so common throughout all of humankind and all of human history? One of the key features of radical theology is it exercises the right to ask any question. The French philosopher Jacques Derrida wants to define philosophy that way. Philosophy is the right to ask any question. Radical theology is like that as well. There are certain questions that are just off the table in certain confessional theology. You just don't ask those questions. The nuns whack you on the knuckles with a ruler and say, "Don't ask that question." We can't talk about that. Radical theology reserves this right to ask any question, and that's what relates it so much to philosophy, because philosophy is the right to ask any question. So is radical theology. Now, but it's also a thing. I mean, it's not just a concept. It was a thing. It took off around the 1960s, which, again, if you're, keeping your timeline in mind, that's also when existentialist thought was in its heyday in America. It had its roots in the 20s with Heidegger, and then the middle of the century with Beauvoir and Sartre, and then people in America were reading during the wild 60s. Existentialism was a big part of that. And it was also with the rise of secularism, where the mainline churches started to empty out. Your generation did not invent the fleeing of mainline Christianity. It's been going on for half a century now. Some of the most important books, just for the record here, Gilbert Vahanian's The Death of God, or Post-Christian Culture, Paul Van Buren, The Secular Meaning of the Gospels, Eugene Robinson sold millions of copies of the book Honest to God. It's still out there, still worth a read. Very, very interesting book in many ways. Thomas J.J. Altizer, The Gospel of Christian Atheism. And with his writing partner William Hamilton, Radical Theology and the Death of God. The Death of God, you already know, that came from at least a proto-existentialist thinker, Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche. God is dead and we have killed him. How do we live with that? And remember, God is, again, not the child story of an old guy with a long beard that sits up on a throne somewhere that somebody actually went up and poisoned or something. God as this the center, the core, the pivot around which our lives and our cultures revolve. That we got rid of that in secularism in a way. We marginalized that with science and technology and consumerism and various other things like that. So it was a kind of a response to what was going on in the culture, the secularization movement, and trying to say what can we say about everything that's happened with our Christian traditions. Now, Paul Tillich is part of this. He was born in Germany, but he spent a lot of his life in Chicago. He died in the U.S., died in Chicago. He got his PhD in philosophy, so he's a philosopher, but then he got his licentiate in theology. That's the degree you need to get a job as a preacher. He was ordained a Lutheran minister in 1912, became an army chaplain in World War I, which really, if you watch the video, that had a profound influence on his thinking, the suffering and the devastation. He was a professor of theology at Marburg in 1924-25, and Heidegger was in the philosophy department at Marburg at the same time. So they waved at each other down the hall, I guess. Also there at the same time was theologian Rudolf Bultmann, who gave us these ideas of demythologization. Yes, the gospel stories are true, but there's a mythology about it that if you take them to be literally true, you'll miss the point. They're myths. Those myths got to go away. We got to find the core of Christianity. He has this idea of religionless Christianity. If you know the Campus Crusade, sometimes talk about churchianity. They're in some ways influenced by Rudolf Bultmann. Hannah Arendt, whose name has come up a couple of times, the great political philosopher and ethicist, and other people were there at the same time. So it was a really hotbed of really creative and influential thought. He was a professor at Frankfurt, but he got dismissed because of the rise of Hitler. Not because he's Jewish, but because his ideas did not square with the National Socialist ideology. He was invited by Reinhold Niebuhr, another giant in Protestant theology in the 20th century, invited him to come to Union Theological Seminary in New York. In 1933, he taught at Harvard Divinity School and then the University of Chicago until his death. And I just mentioned this, I don't have time to talk about it, but he was a proponent of Christian socialism. And many people think that Christianity on the one hand and socialism on the other hand are incompatible, that you've got to pick one or the other. That's not so, and there are roots of something like a socialism that you could find in the book of Acts. Everybody's living together and sharing what they had in common. Christianity and capitalism in America are alleged to go together like hand in glove. That also is a very controversial claim. A lot could be said against that idea. Well, anyway, so just putting it out there. It's yes, what we know of like Soviet communism was very hostile to religion. That's totally true. That's completely true. But socialism is not the same as Soviet communism, and they could go together. In fact, they can go together nicely. Tillich was super famous. We don't have news gatekeepers the way we used to now with the internet. Everybody with a webcam can start their own vlog and give you their view of the news and all that kind of stuff. But once upon a time, there were these news weeklies. They came out. Time, the other one was Newsweek. One was supposed to be a little bit more conservative, the other maybe a little more liberal, but they're very similar. And they came out once a week, and even people who didn't subscribe to Time or Newsweek talked about what Time and Newsweek talked about. So there's a little bit of they selfie stuff going on there. Remember what Heidegger says, once we have newspapers, everybody will be thinking the same. Well, okay, in some ways he's got a point here. People always waited to see what was going on in Time and Newsweek, and Tillich made the cover of Time magazine. That was pretty good. They don't put just anybody on the cover. Give you one somewhat unrelated example. Bruce Springsteen once made the cover of Time magazine, and he made the cover the same week he made the cover of Newsweek magazine. So if you went to the newsstand that week, there was Bruce on both of the weeklies that everybody bought. And it, superstarred his career like overnight. Well, everybody knew about Tillich. I don't know if they all read Tillich, but everybody knew about him. His most important books, and he wrote a lot of books, but the Protestant Era, Shaking the Foundations, people say that his 3 volumes of systematic theology is his masterwork, probably is. The Courage to Be, 52, Dynamics of Faith, 57, I'm going to talk about a little bit, and then a very important book, Theology of Culture, which I'll say a few things about. But note this, all of these books were written in English, and pretty good English, especially, for instance, The Dynamics of Faith, which is a beautifully written, thoughtful, clear book. I hope you had a chance to look at it, or maybe you will look at it at some point. He had to learn English. He didn't know any English when Niebuhr invited him over here. He was just trying to save, Niebuhr was trying to save his friend Tillich from the Nazis. He had to learn English on the fly, and he wrote these wonderful books all in English. It's hard to get your mind around how hard that is to be able to do what he did. All right, so some key ideas from Tillich. First of all, you probably heard in the videos this idea of the method of correlation. This goes back to this idea of what theology is trying to do, right? Trying to talk about what's going on in terms of biblical teaching. So it's a kind of hermeneutic circle. We know that word hermeneutics means interpretation, and we know that we're from Heidegger that we always come in the middle. We can't start from scratch and say, all right, let me develop some kind of point of view, which I need in order to interpret. No, you're born into a point of view. You're born into a world that's been there going on before you got there. You're born into a world that gave you certain lenses, and then you try to make interpretations, but as you do that it could reflect back on your lenses, might reshape your lenses, get you to see things a little bit differently, and it's just an ongoing circle. You can never really step out of that circle. It's not a vicious circle, but there's no firm ground, no utopian, no place to start. That we don't get. Human existence issues in existential questions. Just living through what we're living through now brings people to question. It drives Shakira to go take a course at Penn online in philosophy. Right? It's raising questions, and those questions can be formulated by theology, which then tries to provide answers in the light of the Christian message. And why does that happen? Well, Tillich traces it right to Christ, right to Jesus as the Christ, as the videos say. The divine-human relation itself is a correlation. Let that sink in for a second. These are my words, not Tillich's. In a sense, what they're saying, and Tillich's not the only philosopher theologian that says this. One of my most important philosophers for me, a Spaniard, Javier Zubiri, would say something similar, that what God is expressed in us, and what we are is ununderstandable outside the idea of the divine. Right? You can almost find that all the way back in Aristotle, when he talks about to be the best we could be, we have to activate the most divine thing in us. Right? So there's a correlation ontologically. We're built correlatively, if you want to put it that way. So when we try to think about ourselves, we can't not think about ourselves in this correlated kind of manner. Now, the problem, again, is that according to Tillich anyway, confessional theology is providing answers to questions no one's asking. The correlation is being broken somehow, or has been broken. It's trying to get it back. So that's important to his way of thinking about things. Then he talks about this idea of the ground of being. Now, that is new, I guess we'd have to say. That is new. The word ground is philosophically suspicious for our prior philosophers. We talk about being over the abyss, being over the void, being ungrounded. Not so for Tillich. It's a different point of view. He thinks we have a bad idea of God, and because we have a bad idea of God, it's easy given certain cultural, historical circumstances, to push God aside, to just get rid of God. That idea of God as a supreme being is the problem. Now, even if we don't have the childish or cartoonish version of an old man with a long beard sitting on a throne, we still have this idea that there's a special entity, a special being, besides all the other beings, all the human beings and coffee cup beings and table beings. There's some special super duper being called God. And Tillich calls that idea mythological and half blasphemous. Now, what's blasphemy? It's saying ill of God, right? That you don't want to blaspheme. That's saying something bad about God. You don't want to do that. Well, he's arguing here that thinking of God as a supreme entity, a super duper thing, a big thing, itself mistreats God with a misunderstanding. Itself is kind of blasphemous. No, he thinks God is the ground out of which being arises. All right, now you have to think about what that looks like. He also, he's got another metaphor for God, and these are metaphors, and he thinks we can't live without metaphors. It's only metaphorical what we say about God. We can't get directly there for reasons we'll see. God is a ground, the deep, ultimate profundity of the depths of being, the roots of being, but he also has this idea of God above God, above the God of theism, more like higher up. Not a being. Being is still too low. It's too little. It's too narrow. It's too confining. The God he thinks is the God is above that. So below it, above it, around it, throughout it, but not some separate entity. That's mythological and half blasphemous. Okay, a picture. All of a sudden, for once, 10 million words in this class, not a picture. So let me try to explain a little bit about what he's talking about here. So if you look at the bottom of the screen, you see the ground of being, or what he also calls the unconditional. God is the unconditional. There are no conditions which delimit God as the ground from which everything arises. Throughout time, that's the blue arrow going up, the expression of God is always conditioned, limited, defined, circumscribed over time. So what is that conditioned manifestation of God? What is that expression of God? Answer: culture. So this is Tillich's theology of culture. Our culture, everything that's going on with us, is an expression of this ultimate ground of being. It is an expression. It doesn't express it in its fullness because over time that expression changes and will continue to change. So anytime you take a time slice, like today, you just say, take a slice out of this expression. If you look around and you see culture, what you're seeing is the historical, temporal, conditioned expression of the unconditional. And that brings me to another key idea of Tillich, the idea of the Protestant principle, the idea of the Protestant principle. Now, he doesn't mean that, if you want to understand things, you got to become a Protestant, or you got to become a Lutheran, or hold to some of, the 5 points of Calvinism, all Protestant theological ideas. No, it's simply stated. Here it is. The conditioned is never adequate to the unconditional. Our problem is that we look around and say, this expression of God is God. This particular time-bound, historical, culturally formulated expression of God is God. That's God. Now, Tillich says, and that's idolatry. What's idolatry? Taking for God that which is not God. That's a simple definition of idolatry. Taking as God that which isn't God. So if whatever you worship, if you worship something other than what's actually God, you're an idolater. If you worship romance or money or the nation state or even your church's teaching, if you take that to be God, Tillich says, that's idolatry. So the Protestant principle is what Luther would say, semper reformata, always reforming, always reforming. You always say, yeah, this is God, but that's not all there is to God. There might be more to God. There is more to God than this. Whatever we say God is, that's our best shot at it at this moment in time. It's the best we could do, but that doesn't mean that's all we can do. That there's always more. There's always magus, as we say around St. Joe's, right? There's more. There's more to it than that. So the culture and religion are not separated. Religion is the substance of culture. Culture is the form of religion. You get that? Religion is the substance. It's what culture is all about. Culture is the form or format or the manifestation or the expression of that deep ground of religion. So our religion is expressed in our culture. Our culture is our religious expression. So that's that Protestant Reformation. There's no conditional expression can fully capture the unconditional. And those who think what we're doing today, or what our Methodist or PCUSA or Presbyterian Church of America or Roman Catholic Church or Serbian Orthodox Church, whatever we're doing, that just is the truth of God. And all the rest is a mistake. That's idolatry. It's unwilling to keep forming and reforming, which it does. That's why he writes a book called The Dynamics of Faith. It's dynamic. It's not static. It's not over and done with. It's always on the move. And if you feel that dynamism a little bit, you may well be reminded of all the things we've been learning from our existentialist philosophers, right? Our possibilities are higher than our actualities. What we might be is even more important than what we are, because what we are itself is not an over and done with thing, but a set of possibilities of what might come in the future, right? So there is some relationship between what Tillich is doing here in mystical or negative theology, so I should say something about those very quickly. Negative theology, it's not mean or what's bad. It's just basically saying you can only talk about God by saying what God is not, right? The minute you say something about God, you're always a little bit wrong. There is a sense of that, right? If you say the conditioned expression is God, you're not completely wrong, but you're always a little bit wrong, right? And if you take it as completely right, that's where the idolatry hits in. Then he says, and this ties with this whole idea, how could culture be religion expressed? Because he's going to say that what religion is, what faith is, and in fact, correlatively, what God is a matter of our ultimate concern. It's probably one of the most famous things that Tillich is known for. Faith is a matter of our ultimate existential concern. That's a Heidegger word, isn't it? That's the Heidegger word care, concern, solicitude. That to which all other concerns must be sacrificed or at least relativized. Everything that concerns me relative to that which concerns me ultimately, my ultimate concern. There's a little bit of parallel of, what's going on there with what Aristotle said about happiness, right? He says, I want all these things. Like I want to pass this class because I want to get a degree, because I want to get a job someday, and because I want to get money and I want a house, right? I want all those things, I really do, but I only want them relative to the fact that I believe those things will make me happy, right? Happiness for Aristotle would be the equivalent of kind of an ultimate concern. He called it a telos, a built-in final cause for each of us, but it's not totally unlike what Tillich is talking about here. Our ultimate concern is that which relativizes all of our other concerns, makes those other concerns the concerns that they are. If Heidegger were to use this terminology, what would be our ultimate concern? He would say Dasein, wouldn't he? Right? The ultimate for the sake of which, he said, in being in time, Dasein would be our ultimate concern. What's our biggest concern? We are our biggest concern. Our being is a question for us, a concern for us. And that's what creates the world, this referential system of concerns and cares. Well, okay, Tillich is doing that same thing, but he's pointing to the correlative nature of Dasein. He's the correlative nature of what it means to be human, that correlation between not just theology and the questions we have, but the correlation between God and humans, the inescapable, inextricable correlation. So God is going to be our ultimate concern. God is what he calls the ultimate concern. Now, again, that's not a separate entity that I'm concerned about, some super supreme being, because that's mythological and half blasphemous. Since God and humans are correlative, that correlation is my ultimate concern, and God is that correlation, as best as we can say it at any given time in history, a conditional expression of that, never adequate to the full correlation of what it means to be human and what God means to be God. He talks about, then, in the light of this tension between our necessary expressions of our ultimate concerns and the actual ultimate, the unconditioned, the tension between the conditioned expressions and the unconditioned. And he says that tension calls for a kind of correlation. This is Tillich's existentialism. And he, in a book, Courage to Be, talks about anxiety. And he says there are three sources of anxiety: the anxiety of fate and death. We know that we're going to die. We may tamp that down. We know it's not very, 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 very unlikely it's going to be today. It's something that we could push out in an indefinite kind of future. We may have a they version of how we think about death. Nevertheless, we're aware of it, and we know in those moments where it bubbles up to the surface, we get anxious, in the sense of we don't know what it is we're afraid of, because we don't know what death is. We just know that it will negate all of our projects and plans, and we feel the anxiety. There's an anxiety, he says, of guilt and condemnation. This is, Heidegger talks about guilt, but he's got a kind of a, he had a kind of a weird understanding of that. This is moral guilt. Tillich thinks that, we have to make choices. We have to make decisions. Those decisions have consequences, and we're responsible for those consequences, but we don't really know deep down how ultimately to make those decisions and what ultimately those consequences are. So there's always an anxiety: do we do the right thing? We feel like we're doing the right thing. We hope to do the right thing, but we know we probably didn't do the right thing because we can't know exactly how to do the right thing. So we have anxiety about that. And then we have, sort of the classic anxiety of existentialism, that of meaninglessness and a kind of emptiness or a voidness. We can't just be something over and done with, finished. That leaves us feeling uncanny, unheimlich, kind of homeless in the world, and we feel anxiety about that. So his analysis is certainly complementary to Heidegger's and the French. He says that anxiety calls for courage to be in the face of non-being, right? Death is no more being for you. Guilt is the non-being of your good intentions. Meaninglessness is the non-being of your projects. He says in the face of all that, we need to express courage. The courage to negate our non-being by affirming our existence. Affirmation. So for Tillich, courage is an affirmation of our existence, that we are, that we are active, that we are dynamic. He says it's the courage to accept our acceptance. Now, this is a very Christian idea of grace and forgiveness, that God, no matter what we've done, no matter how we've acted, whatever our actuality is, God loves us. God is accepting. But a lot of people struggle with that. They say, well, it's all well and good you tell me that God loves me, but I don't really love me because I was terrible. I did something wrong. I feel embarrassed, ashamed, guilty. I condemn myself almost for the terrible, as you see them, things that you've done. The world, from a cosmic point of view, we talked about before, that doesn't care about what we do. The world turns. It has earthquakes. It has viruses. None of those things care about what you do or didn't do. It's accepted. It is. It's an affirmation that we are accepted as in our being. And then there's what he calls the courage of true faith. The courage of faith in that which you cannot totally get your arms around. Faith in that which you cannot not have some doubts about. The courage to believe. Just to wrap up, a few passages now from the dynamics of faith, just to try to pull a few things together here. Just some quotes, and I'll say something about it. So this is the point where the ambiguous character, remember ambiguity is such a big word for Heidegger and for Beauvoir, who writes her ethics book called The Ethics of Ambiguity. This is the point where the ambiguous, the two senses character of religion is most visible, and the dangers of faith are most obvious. The danger of faith is idolatry. Right? That's it. He's going to say we have to have the courage of faith, but faith comes with an unavoidable risk, a risk that we will take that which we are placing our faith in to be the unconditioned, the ultimate ground of being, when in fact it is not. That's idolatry. And the ambiguity of the holy, that which we're putting our faith in, is its demonic possibility. What he means by demonic is that it could be terrible outcome. Our ultimate concern can destroy us as it can heal us, but we can never be without it. In the book, he talks about ultimate concerns, and one of the things, of course, from his own experience in the world, what was going on in the world, was nationalism. Nationalism was a big danger, as Tillich saw it. Everybody was putting their faith in the country, their nation, and a lot of terrible things were happening to human beings because of that demonic faith. So, but we can't not have an ultimate concern. We are expressions of our ultimate concern. So, certainty and uncertainty. Faith is certain insofar as it's an experience of the holy, but faith is uncertain insofar as the infinite to which it is related is received by a finite being. Right? That's that whole idea that faith is certain because it's an experience of the unconditional. We are it, we feel it, it's there, but we got to put it into action, put it into expression, even put it into words. That part is the conditioned. That part is never going to be equal to the unconditional. So it's uncertain if we recognize that. So it's uncertain insofar as the infinite is related, to which it is related, is received by a finite being. This element of uncertainty in faith cannot be removed. It must be accepted. Because if you remove it, what? It means you think your conditioned expression is actually unconditional. That's idolatry, right? You have to accept this ambiguity. And the element in faith which does the accepting is courage. Courage. So there can't be faith without courage. Courage as an element of faith is the daring self-affirmation of one's own being in spite of the powers of non-being, which are the heritage of everything finite. Like by definition, finite means non-being is coming, right? It's only going to last a certain time. It's only going to go so far, right? Non-being is part of everything. Sartre talks about that in a different kind of way. Where there is daring and courage, there is also the possibility of failure. Failure is an inescapable possibility in living a human life. And in every act of faith, this possibility is present. The risk must be taken. Even if you were to say, and this is a good existential way of putting it, Beauvoir would see it exactly like this, if you were to say, you know what, I'm not going to take a risk, that is the risk. That is an expression of some version of your understanding of ultimate concern. All right, so the risk must be taken. Idolatry, really, in the end, is what it's all about. The only certainty is the ultimacy as ultimacy, the infinite passion as infinite passion, the experience of the unconditional, the connection with the ground of being. This is a reality given to the self with our own nature. Our own nature knows that. It is as immediate and as much beyond doubt as the self is to the self. It is the self in its self-transcending quality. But there is not certainty of this kind about the content of our ultimate concern, because that's conditioned. Be it the nation, success, a God, or the God of the Bible. They all are contents without immediate awareness. Their acceptance as matters of ultimate concern is a risk and therefore an act of courage. There is a risk if what was considered as a matter of ultimate concern proves to be a matter of preliminary and transitory concern, as for example, the nation. The risk to faith in one's ultimate concern is indeed the greatest risk human beings can run. If it proves to be a failure, the meaning of one's life breaks down. Right? This is a high-stakes game, human existence, as Tillich sees it. The worry for him is always idolatry. The risk cannot be taken away from any act of faith. There is only one point which is a matter not of risk, but of immediate certainty, and herein lies, as he puts it, the greatness and the pain of being human, namely, one standing between one's finitude and one's potential infinity. It's inescapable risk. Faith and doubt and courage, then. The kind of doubt that he's talking about here is not methodological or scientific doubt where the minute you try to prove, you feel like you prove something, you got to try to disprove it right away. That's how science makes its progress. It's not some kind of skeptical cynicism, like despair. He says, note that kind of skepticism leads to indifference and the attempt to develop an attitude of complete unconcern. But since human being is that being who is essentially concerned about his being, that's right out of Being in Time, isn't it? Such an escape finally breaks down. This is the dynamics of skeptical doubt. It has an awakening and liberating function. It's good to be a little skeptical. That could break you out of the they self, couldn't it? But it can also prevent the development of a centered personality if all you do is doubt and just can't take the courage of faith. For personality is not possible without faith. Think about that. The despair about truth by the skeptic shows that truth is still in our infinite passion. No, the kind of doubt he's talking about is, he calls it himself, existential doubt. It does not question whether a special proposition is true or false, like science. It does not reject every concrete truth, like cynicism, but it is aware of the element of insecurity in every existential truth. At the same time, the doubt which is implied in faith accepts this insecurity and takes it into account in an act of courage. Faith includes courage. Therefore, it can include the doubt about itself. Right? Now, as an existentialist, what did we learn? That there were no guarantees, there were no promises, there were no cosmic insurance policies for our choices, that we are free and that we are responsible. But Tillich is saying that, in effect, that what the existentialists without theology are saying is maybe only one side of the equation. They're missing the correlation between ourselves and who we are and the ultimate ground of being, our ultimate concern, which gets the label God, Again, not as some kind of supreme being. You can't understand yourselves outside of that correlation, they would argue.